What's up, YouTube? So today I want to look at what I think is the most clinical way of synthesizing percussion from scratch. So let's dive in and have a look. So the idea I'm going to discuss today is using FM or frequency modulation to create percussion. So it's not something that you often find associated with percussion, especially not in the psytrance field, because FM is one of those things that we generally think of, you know, those kind of grindy synths and that kind of thing. However, that being said, is traditional FM synthesis has so many capabilities that I think are relatively under-discovered. I kind of want to investigate those today and show you guys the beauty of synthesizing your percussions this way, because you actually get so much more control than, you know, the regular using white noise and subtractive synthesis methods. So because this does get a little bit complex, I'm going to be using phase plant for this tutorial, but I'm going to try do it in Serum afterwards, because there's a couple of things there that I have outlined in previous videos, but I think it could be a good idea to showcase them in this type of example. So let's just open up a blank instance of phase plant over here. What I'm going to do is pop in an analog oscillator, and let's set this to sine wave. So I'm not going to go into the kind of fundamentals of what FM are, and I'm not going to go into the differences of what FM in phase plant is compared to FM in other synths. But just for the purpose of this tutorial, we're going to be modulating the phase as opposed to the frequency modulation. So let's just duplicate this analog oscillator over here. And immediately off the bat, what we can do is set this output to modulate the phase. So like I said, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to be calling this FM just to make things a little bit easier to understand, because this is how most other plugins would be creating FM. And what FM is doing is it's basically creating a more complex waveform. You're adding harmonics. So it doesn't sound like much now. It sounds like a kind of grindy synth sound, but just watch the beauty of what happens when we start stacking these up. So just to wrap your head around things, what's happening here is the audio feed is only coming from the first oscillator. The rest of these oscillators here are only being used as modulation sources. So what we can do here is let's set this one to then modulate the next one. And you'll notice that it's getting a little bit more kind of gritty. And the idea here is to just keep stacking them up. And okay, so we're at 3 modulators now, and it's starting to get to that noise territory. Still sounds a little bit like a kind of robotic synth sound. So let's do one more. And let's adjust the phase of this next one over here. So you get to the point where you're basically creating a waveform that's kind of so complex that you're perceiving it as noise, or essentially it is just noise. Then what you can do is you can go and you can play with the phase offset of each of these modulation oscillators, as well as the audio oscillator. Essentially what we're trying to do is kind of smooth out those peaks there, so we're getting a kind of more even, complex waveform. Here, what we can do, again, to kind of smooth out those peaks, is to distort the signal. And now we're getting to the point where this is, you know, most definitely white noise. There might be a little bit of a kind of harmonic sound in there, but that's most definitely, you know, within percussive sound territory. So the beauty of this now is we can modulate any of these parameters here. You know, for example, in terms of like the most basic, what we can do is we could create like an envelope to create that kind of percussive sound. I'm going to put a little bit of reverb here. Actually, just want to slice EQ, and we can cut out the lows. And then we can put a reverb over here. Just turn the decay, the size down, and the dampening up. Cool, something like that. So the spread on the distortion is very nice to kind of give it a bit of a wideness. But I mean, depending on the type of sound you want, you might want a kind of mono snare to cut through or something like that. So, like I said, just having control of all these parameters is really, really cool for synthesizing your own percussion. So we've got a basic white noise sound going. So to get some really, really interesting stuff going, to get some kind of tonal harmonics into the mix, something really, really cool that you can do is to apply envelopes to various different parameters. So one thing that's really cool would be to, for example, set an envelope to modulate the amount of modulation that's being applied to this phase. So what's happening is, when the key gets triggered here, it's going to... So what happens now, when the key gets triggered, it begins this envelope cycle, and it starts at the regular sine wave and slowly modulates this entire kind of phase modulation, or let's say frequency modulation stack. It slowly modulates that inwards. So when you do this at a really quick rate, it becomes really nice percussive sound. So I'm setting the release here higher than this release so it doesn't come back in again afterwards. We can actually turn the hold up as well to save that. Essentially, we're creating this kind of like layered sound with a sine wave and noise, but doing it with a single audible voice. So again, being able to control these single fundamentals of the sound. For example, we could put a pitch here. And then obviously tune it up. There's so much control over the sound here. So you're able to, create percussive sounds of almost any nature. Whether you even want this white noisy effect. You can mix it in here. Or we could create macros to do each kind of step, So let's say, for example, I want to set a macro to turn off this modulation here. And then at the same time, it's going to tune this down. It should actually tune it up when this... So let's turn this down again and then get it to turn up with the... There we go. So we can create a macro to sweep between whether we want it to have that kind of transient or not. So that's kind of like more of a kind of piccolo snare, I guess you could say. It's got that kind of like mid-range. So then here, what we could do is we could choose like a max point. And then set a macro to like modulate downwards. That's too much. And we can call this something like Titan. And let's call this transient. And this is also, like, obviously responds to the key. So you can do, like, interesting melodic stuff with it if you want as well. Here, we've also got control over each of these levels, which is another interesting thing to modulate with an envelope, to create, like, some glitchy kind of sound effect, percussive stuff. What I actually want to do here, no, we can actually just set macros. I'll create one massively huge preset with all the macros, everything for my Patreons. So here, let's modulate this level 50% and then turn it down. No, it's a bit much. We could set it to modulate some of these other amounts as well. Could get some interesting stuff there. So here what we can start doing is let's apply some filters and stuff. Let's say, for example, a high pass. This can be a nice way of creating a sort of artificial resonance as well that kind of sounds percussive. So what we can do here is we can set this to sweep a kind of narrow band there to kind of like accentuate the mid-range a bit. Cool, and then let's maybe stack some distortions here after the filter. So we can hold control. Let's maybe set this to saturate. Okay, so let's call this tone. Let's set a mix control for this second saturation. So let's set one to modulate the decay a bit, the sustain a bit, and then the release quite a bit. To get that kind of effect like that. Just call this decay, it's okay, it doesn't matter. Cool. Let me save this and move on to the Serum version. So the idea here is to open up basic shapes on both sides, set them to saw waves, FM from B, turn this one's level down, and then we go resample AB stereo, and then we go here, basic shapes, FM from B, and then we do this again, resample to AB stereo. Then we go basic shapes. And we've done it. So here, the difference is we're not going to be doing it with a single voice. Let's use envelope 2 to modulate in this level over here. Let's play around with a sustain here and this release to give it more of a percussive nature. And we can also create another envelope to control like the pitch or something like that of this oscillator. Let's set this to unipolar. Let's just zoom in a bit. So here we can do effects. Let's just go with the reverb. I'm not going to get too in depth with it because, you know, you could use the previous example in Phase Plant and apply, you know, the ideas as you wish. Obviously, you're a little bit more limited in terms of like the routing and that kind of thing. I'm going to call this a day. Let's just call this FM Percussion. Cool. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. I'm going to be posting these 2 presets onto my Patreon for my $5 supporters. So if you want to know what that's all about, check out the link that's either in the description or on the screen. Yeah, see you guys next time.